Good afternoon and welcome to the final in the latest Toolkit series. Where did this go? Um, for those of you who have missed this previously, or just a reminder, this is your micro credentials that you can gain from attending all these sessions. Robin, this is part of our collaboration with Aspect, who funded this series.
Yes, absolutely. So massive thanks to Aspect again. And yeah, just for any of you joining for the first time or just want to recap, it is a network, a consortium of universities. We're up to nearly 40, I believe now. Very much looking to support projects as they come out of research in the arts, humanities, social sciences disciplines, and others as well. All are welcome here. And the point is, how do we get to sort of sustainability? Sometimes it's commercialization, often not, but there's usually a link there somewhere on the way. And we've had a fantastic time so far. So yeah, do sign up for the micro credential. Do think about doing the survey at the end to give us some feedback. I'm really excited. Can't believe actually we haven't had Richard on before. And looking forward to this because a lot of the projects that we deal with when we're supporting them in the areas of shape, there's lots of ability to be creative and to think about, what sort of impact they have or, getting audiences involved. And so I'm really looking forward to this session. Thank you.
No
Over to you,
pressure, no
Richard.
pressure, Richard. I like that. No, it's back to that creativity. And I'm going to put the link for the micro credentials into the chat for you imminently. And thank you for the lovely things you're saying in chat, which I'm not going to read out because that's just embarrassing. But thank you, everybody. Um, so this is a schedule. Don't worry if this is your first time. All of these are on YouTube. I will share the link with you. But it has evolved each time. So as Robin said, we do listen to your feedback. AI didn't even exist in the first series, and now it's been very richly a part of this. But hopefully you've been able to attend all of those, and that's the background. So, Richard, thank you for joining us.
Nice to be here.
And Robin's right. This is all about different ways to gather information, to reach audiences, to have different asks and different experiences. So, over to you.
Thanks, Lucy. Just before I begin sort of formally, a shout out to Aspect, and in particular the sort of the Game Hub bit of Aspect, because there's already some great resources for those interested in if you do want to go and make a game as part of a research output, like what would the steps be? And so it sort of takes you through that
Nice.
process. And I was fortunate to be kind of involved in that a couple of years back. So there's already some great resources there. What I'm going to try and do today is sort of ground that a little bit more because that works quite well in the abstract. If you want to sort of follow a path, but it doesn't, I don't think, give you quite as much kind of insight into what a project might look like if you do that, or kind of different people's journeys if you have started to make games or you're interested in making games as part of your research. Or even if you just want to experiment because you're not sure, I'll be touching a lot more on those kinds of things today through my own work. So yeah, hopefully this can sit quite nicely alongside what's already on the Aspect network.
And we can
Um,
add that link. We're going to put a series of links into the YouTube description, won't we? Because there's bits and pieces we don't have time for today. So I'll add that link in there as well.
yeah, fantastic.
Brilliant. Thank you.
No worries. Right, let me share my screen.
And as ever,
Hello.
if there's anybody new, which we ought to say, if anyone's new, put your comments in the chat. My job is to ask all the silly questions. So you can either, if you feel you don't want to ask it to everybody, you can pop it to me on a DM. But we want to make this a conversation. That's one of the best things about being online, is you haven't got to wait until the end. So please do talk to us, which I think
Yeah,
most of you do. You've all been great over the last 5 sessions. So please continue talking to us.
absolutely. And no games knowledge or experience is required to understand anything that I'm going to be talking about. That's
Thankfully, I
the,
feel very
the
out of
whole
my comfort
point.
zone here.
No, but I would before I sort of formally get going, while people are listening, if you've got time in the chat to sort of say, are you a gamer? Do you play games? And also, has anyone got involved in game development? Do you come from a kind of development background? Have you been part of projects that have been involved with making games? Yeah, I'd love to sort of see some of that as we go through, because then I can kind of tailor what I'm talking about to, yeah, to people's interests, or keep it at the kind of level if this is a completely new area of work for people. But yeah, absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for the invite, Robin and Lucy. I'm going to be talking about gamification and playable experiences. I'm a senior lecturer in digital futures. That's my sort of academic background. I do actually come from classics and ancient history originally, so a slightly sort of unusual mix potentially, thinking about the future and the past. But there is a logic to that, and I'll showcase that sort of through technology in a minute. I also co-direct the Bristol Digital Game Lab. We've got our fancy neon sign there on the screen, and also the MA in Games Design brackets narrative at the University of Bristol. The brand new MA launching this autumn, really focusing on narrative design and sort of the power of storytelling within games. Um, so yeah, I kind of approach games from lots of different angles, and that will come out in some of the work that I'll share shortly. But just a sort of high level, what I'll do with this session is talk a little bit about my own background, kind of how I came to study games and work on them in a sort of university context, but also sort of public engagement, education, and sort of commercialization context. And then I'll sort of show two kind of areas of work that the Game Lab has focused on largely over the last 4 years since we started. And all of this will kind of speak to gamification, not in that sort of sciencey way where you take kind of leaderboards and badges and points and add them to a sort of a non-game experience, or try and kind of gamify language learning as something like Duolingo does. I'm less interested in that. That's definitely a sort of way in which gamification has kind of emerged out or sort of bled outside of the games ecosystem into kind of the wider world. And many of us will be familiar with those sorts of ideas. Even something like Uber is a very gamified experience. I'm less interested in that. I think there are actually quite a lot of problems with that as a sort of model and taking the arguably the worst bits of games or the bits of games that kind of hack our brains to act in certain ways. I'm less interested in that and much more in the power of games to meaningfully improve society and change the way we think about things and help us think through complex problems. And I think they can do that. And that's where I think the gamification is really interesting. So it's less about trying to engage you, though it might be about that, but more about thinking through, complex problems.
We've got some
Through
old school gamers in the chat. We've got some
Oh,
Space
fantastic.
Invaders. We've got some Sims, Pac-Man, um, Sonic. I mean, there's some good classics here. But I like that approach and that differentiation, as you say, because gamification is an overused word.
Yes, absolutely. I think it was something that was picked up kind of by, you know, deep tech startups and tech companies, especially in the States, around kind of building apps and keeping people on apps and things like that. I think, yeah, it works because games have a power, but I think we can use that power for for a lot better.
There's a manipulative angle to
Yes,
some of the insinuations with the tech companies. Yeah, I totally agree.
absolutely. So a little bit about my own background. I mentioned I come from a kind of classics background. That's my formal training. But I was very lucky for my postdoc to work on a project that really sort of transformed the way I think and opened a new trajectory for me. And it was this really big AHRC, so Art and Humanities Research Council funded project that was about building a virtual reality experience of visiting an ancient oracle, in this case, the Oracle of Zeus in Dodona in northwest Greece, and to put that experience in a museum and in schools to improve educational outcomes. And to do that, we worked with a games company who built, as you'll see there on the screen, an experience of visiting the Oracle of Dodona in quite a kind of cartoonesque way. It was built in Unity, in the game engine Unity, where you could also build VR experiences as well as traditional games and other things. Um, and it was on that project where we were working with an industry partner to realize something wouldn't have been possible without that kind of games expertise and knowledge of building 3D worlds, also with an aim to make this a thing that could work in an educational context in an accessible way. So we built it for phones that you could put into Google Cardboard headsets. This is very much of the kind of 2020 2021 era. That's the project ran 2020 to 2023. So really quite early VR work still. But it was working on this project. It was during that moment that I sort of, rather than just wanting to run academic projects that had impact in their own right, I was like, well, can we create a kind of ecosystem where we could continue to do this kind of work across universities and beyond? When we were working with expertise in game design and game development to continually kind of explore and experiment with ideas that would only be possible with all those people in the room. So this is where I kind of moved from studying the past and making experiences only focused on the past towards kind of seeing what we could do at that intersection. That's when I founded the Bristol Digital Game Lab, based at the University of Bristol. And our mission from the very get-go has always been that games aren't just entertainment. That's definitely coming through in some of the comments already. But we think they're tools to change, whether it is Minecraft and education and the power of user-generated content, through to games that can improve policy outcomes, that can impact education, that can create a new space to talk about PTSD in the case of a game like Hellblade. There's sort of myriad examples now where games have really made that kind of step from entertainment to be a tool for change. Um, so that's where the Bristol Digital Game Lab comes in. We are really interested in those different areas where games can make a difference, can help us solve complex challenges. And to sort of achieve that, we connect, as I said earlier, sort of research the gaming sector and those communities of interest in each of those areas, and then form projects that emerge at those different intersections. That goes far above and beyond kind of my own individual interest or my own projects, and is now a kind of ecosystem and infrastructure. We sometimes called it a connective infrastructure that allows for these ideas to be shared iteratively year on year in different contexts. And we now have people coming to us, and we really enjoy that kind of supporting other projects through the ideas that we can provide. So what do? We do four things, and I'm going to talk about two of them today, not all four, because two of them really speak more to the kind of theme of gamification and playable experiences, and that's game jams on the one hand, and then co-design on the other. So game jams, for those of you who may have never heard the term before, they're kind of rapid prototyping sessions where you come together and try and make a game in a very short space of time, normally in teams. And co-design is where you kind of make games with others collaboratively. It's a term from within the industry where sort of studios will develop games together. But in our context, it's like co-design across academia and games ecosystem and the third sector, for example. We also do consultancy with the games industry and with other academic projects looking to make games. And we also run player studies on games, sometimes with industry partners who fund that research, and sometimes for academic projects, and sometimes for our own kind of game development process. So that's the sort of ecosystem in which we work. Are there any questions so far before I dive into game jams? Or...
No, I think we've just had a lot of retro gaming love. I
Oh,
think we've
fantastic.
all gone back to our childhood, which I think is a good start to any lunchtime, isn't it?
It is. Well, actually, it's perfect because the reason we think game jams work is because we're all already game designers in some shape or form, because we've encountered the world through play. That doesn't just mean the kind of actual games we play, but the fundamental encounter we have with the world tends to be through making games individually and imaginatively, collectively with others. And we sort of tend to lose that power over time, or we forget that we have that power. And I think that what we've learned from running what now over sort of 30 game jams now is that everyone, even if they don't think of themselves at all as a gamer, never play games, you can still make a brilliant game, and you can think in that way. And what we try and do is kind of surface that potential in the moment. So I said we've run around sort of 30 game jams. What we've done from that is distill a kind of toolkit that's publicly available. So there'll be a link to this afterwards as well. It's called Game Jams as a Method and How to Run Your Own. And this is trying to distill our learnings as to why we think this works as a method for exploring problems. So partly it's the nature of who we all are in different ways, but it's also about the theme. So typically game jams are industry-led events or sort of industry community-led events, and they're about building your portfolio. They sometimes have a loose theme on top, but it's really about trying to make a game in a short time. We sort of flipped that relationship. It's actually all about the theme. You're really exploring a complex topic, a really difficult, knotty, sometimes wicked problem, and you're trying to make a game to make sense of that theme. So we invert the relationship. And the reason we think that works really well is because it sort of embeds that yes and methodology from kind of improv theater, where you're thrown something and you go, okay, yeah, I'll take that and I'll add this. And then you keep doing that in a kind of iterative fashion, which means that everyone gets to contribute and everyone is providing a new idea and you're building collaboratively together in teams on that sort of process. It also allows us to ask what if. I'll come back to why I think games are really interesting in that kind of vein, but that combination of yes and what if is why a game jam is a really productive space for
It's a really
ideation.
different energy, isn't it? You're not sitting there around a board table, you think ideate. If someone says, oh, we're going to have an ideation session, most of us cringe because it feels very formal.
Yeah,
This feels like you're just going to go throw it all out and
absolutely.
think differently. There doesn't feel like it's not restricted.
No, but it's creatively restricted enough, and that's why the theme has to be. We have to
Yeah.
do a lot of work to get the theme right, and then we structure the session. We scaffold it using kind of game design principles, which I'll show shortly. But it is different from just that kind of complete blue sky thinking. Yeah, just come up with ideas for something, or even the other kind of form, like come up with a film, storyboard that, or what would a kind of critical fabulation or creative fiction work in this way? Because all of those have their place, but games are different because they put the player at the center of a system. So that I think they're ideally placed. Their kind of medium specificity or affordances are more powerful for exploration than some other ones can be. Um, and I think it's also because, as I said in that second bullet point, it's about the magic circle, which is an idea of why and how games work that goes all the way back to the mid 20th century. Theorist called Johann Huizinga came up with many different descriptions of games, but the magic circle is one of them. And it's where you kind of take yourself out of reality, place yourself into a space where different rules apply, and then you get to think differently, and then you step back out of that into the real world. And for us, it's that jump between those two spaces that allow games to be really productive for exploring an idea. You come up with new thoughts and new ideas from making sense of that, and then you take those back into the real world. It's that kind of jumping off point. And so the way we run our game jams is we bring teams together, sometimes small teams all the way up to quite large groups of people. So we've run game jams for 4 people in a room all the way up to 60 people in a room. And that kind of flexibility of the method enables us to um, explore themes in different ways and co-create solutions kind of in the moment. So we use game design and the language of games to explore complex problems. And just to give you a flavor of kind of how that's worked, we've had game jams on topics such as algorithmic bias, post-conflict societies, protected sites, trans rights in the UK, game accessibility, language preservation, cultural heritage, and the ethics of AI tools in game design. That's just a sort of sample of the breadth of how this method has worked. And all of these topics have normally been brought by others to us, and then we work collaboratively to say, okay, we think a game jam could work with you in this context. And that's something that the Game Lab now does within the University of Bristol and beyond. So we're always keen to hear from people interested in working with this method. We can come and facilitate a game jam with you, and that's some of the kind of work that we're most interested in because it speaks to our wider mission of games as public service. And our game jams are not just for academics or students, but we work with groups of young people, for instance, around their digital futures. We've worked with professionals, whether that's people in natural England working on protected sites, through to game development professionals working on history games, um, through to people working in accessibility and yeah, a whole range of professionals, and then also the wider public. We've sometimes just thrown open game jams and allowed people to really come together around that theme if it's of interest to them. And as I said at the start, you don't have to be a gamer to come up with a great game. It's just
Who was the author of the Magic Circle book that you
um,
mentioned? Or
Huizinga. It's a name I'm probably absolutely butchering. I could share it afterwards as well.
brilliant stuff.
But
April Louise has asked about how she can work with you in your lab. We'll put some of those into the YouTube details so we can get in
fantastic.
touch. We'll try and put some of the content in there.
Yeah, would love to hear from people. Very happy to have that conversation. Um, so yeah, just to sort of finish off here, the idea is thinking games are complex systems themselves, and they put the player in the midst of that system. And the reason a game jam for us works is because it does the same kind of process, and it lets you work your way through that topic as if you're kind of playing through it. So why does this work? Well, I've got some sort of high level observations as to why we think games work. There's a few sort of terms here from game studies, but I'll just unpack them because I think they are really helpful. So the first is the games, unlike how any other media are, as Espen Arseth argued, they're ergodic, which means they require non-trivial effort to work through. They're not like a book where you just read, although reading does require us to imagine the world. There's a lot more going on there. They're not just like watching a film, a kind of linear experience unfold before you. You have to actually work through the system, whether it's a retro game and you're playing, kind kind of a 2D or a text-based adventure all the way through to kind of modern AAA games with sort of fully realized worlds. You have to actively put effort into using the controller, moving through that world. The game unfolds because you are working through it. So again, that effort is something that's quite interesting when you then start to take game jams and use them in a different context. Games are also procedural. They're rules-based systems. So that means that you can play around with how the rules represent the world. It's not just about representation, it's also about systems. And they're loops. The games work because there is a core loop. So again, if you can work out how that loop can sort of make sense of the topic or the theme, then you've got quite a powerful way into to unpacking that. So just a bit more on the rules. Games make sense because we do things in them, and those doing actions, those verbs, are normally the mechanics. It's what you can do in the game, whether that's a first-person shooter through to a walking simulator where you're just walking. That's the whole mechanic. But in doing so, you're walking through an environment and sort of making sense of that environment. And one of the most powerful games I've ever played is just a 10-minute walking simulator, where you're hearing about a son interview his father about depression. And it's incredibly effective. It really does distill down the lived experience um, that person had. And you're just walking through a kind of visualization of Scotland. It's incredibly evocative. It's called The Longest Walk. So again, verbs can be really simple, but really powerful. Games as well can be powerful representations. So they do represent the world or systems or ideas, and we can play with those representations. We can ask for better representations than we have currently. And then something that I've been working on recently and writing about is how games are inquiry machines. They allow us to ask questions and then they respond through the way in which we interact with them. And in that kind of Q&A, that repetitive Q&A through the game loops, through the mechanics, we get to explore and ask questions we may not have asked or would not be able to ask in other contexts. And this goes right back to something I felt when we were studying running the virtual reality Oracle project, which was when we had to build a simulation of an ancient oracle. We had to ask questions that you don't normally ask as historians. We had to go, well, where was this in the site? Like, how would they have actually encountered the priests or priestesses? We don't know which were there. We know both might have been. But you had to decide. You have to go, well, how would that process have looked like? What would it have been like? So then you're starting to go, well, actually, that's an anthropological question as much as it is a historical one. And you had to sort of talk to anthropologists and work out what a realistic simulation might look like. And then you start to build it, and that sort of locks off other options, but it opens up others. And then you play it and you see people play it, and then they ask different questions because they've seen it. So this is what I mean about that kind of iterative inquiry machine dynamic. It's not just a hypothesis. We don't just build a thing and go, well, that might be the case. To me, it's much more iterative, and games, I think, are a perfect example of that. And then games as fun. I think this is a thing that we've been talking about in a lot of game jams, especially ones around things like trans rights. Should a game about trans rights in the UK be fun? I mean, probably not. It's a really difficult lived experience. The law is really complicated. It's a very charged public debate at the moment. But if you're making a game as a kind of outreach tool to make sense of the law in this context, we work with a team who are studying law. Should games be fun, and should they be about entertainment? And I think games are. They don't have to be fun, but they do tend to need to be engaging. If it is about outreach and engagement, I think some of the worst serious games come from a non kind of game design background. You do need to think through, well, what is the ultimate aim? Is there a win state? Should it be fun? These are interesting questions that we've provoked in all of our jams.
And I guess you think about how you want the person playing the game to feel. If they've
Absolutely.
picked up, you mentioned that trans right, if they've said, I want to engage with this game, they're hopefully in a state where they want to be educated. So they want to have that feeling at the end of, I have more appreciation.
Yeah.
They want to get the win again. It wants to move you forward.
Indeed, and I think that's why something like that walking simulator, The Longest Walk, really works. It's not a fun experience, but the power of it is that you are pulled through the story sort of inexorably to the end. But there is a kind of cathartic element to that as well. So this is where again I think we have sort of baked in assumptions about what a game is. Oh, it's a first person talker and boys play in their bedroom, or it's meant to just be about fun. And I think these are problematic because they're not actually true. Like about
So I was thinking game is almost the wrong word, isn't it? It's what
yeah,
we have right now, but it feels flippant.
yes,
It feels
yes.
frivolous. And actually it's not. This is much more experiential.
Indeed. I mean, I think in my view, games are possibly the preeminent art form because they contained all other art forms in themselves, and they can really change the way we think about the world. And we often spend hundreds, if not thousands, of hours in them for some players. So there's a really qualitative difference going on there. But again, I think we're stuck sometimes thinking about games in a kind of 90s, noughties kind of context, and games have changed a lot in that time. And they're already rebuilding games that were made in that era because that's how quickly we've gone through that cycle of kind of nostalgia. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a very interesting field. And so this is just a little bit more into the kind of the methodology of game jams that we sort of run our sessions around. We tend to sort of run. This will depend on the context and the project, but there are sort of design principles we lead with, and that tends to be around the concept first, the mechanics, those verbs, those actions, and then the kind of wider world. And we split the sort of sessions up so that people can kind of work through this as a scaffold. So like, what is the overall concept for the game? What is it about? And that normally sort of boils down to like, what's the issue at the core of it? What role does the player have within that issue? And what's the sort of core tension that's going on there? That's where all good games start from. And then it's like, okay, so that's the starting point, but what do you do in it? What does the player do? And then what is that core loop? And that helps people kind of iterate. The whole process here is iteration. It's like you keep coming back to the core concept, you work it out, you work out what the mechanics are, you then go, does that speak to the core concept, so on and so forth. And then ultimately we get people to sort of zoom back out and go, so once you play this game, who's affected, what's going on there? What's the context of the whole story? Who are the other characters you're engaging with? What are the stakes ultimately at the end? And by kind of doing this in a matter of an hour to 4 hours to a day to 2 days, again, the method's really flexible. It depends on how much time you have. You can do this in an hour. You can make a game in an hour.
And if
You can
it's
also
your
make,
project, you'll know some of these questions, wouldn't you? If you're working
yes,
on a project and thinking, I think I could apply, gamification. I think you have all this data, you know who you want to help, and you know why you're struggling to reach them and how you want to do. Yeah, I think most people who've got a project in mind on this call will know a lot of
yes,
this.
absolutely. 100%. And that's what we're there to do is to facilitate bringing that to the surface and bringing others then around the table to help unpack that and see what that could look like in different contexts.
Mm.
And then what we're now doing is kind of taking some of those projects we've worked with at a game jam level forward. So we might ideate 6 different concepts and then we go, okay, well, which ones are working best? Which ones could then be taken forward for further development? And our job is to help kind of make that process possible. Because again, it's really hard if you've just got the project here
Well,
and
it's
you're
too
like, I
big,
think a game could
and we're
work.
going to get there because I mean, again, even like taking that forward is very different to how it was 10, 20 years ago. We've looked at tools like the Lovables and this sort of. It's a lot easier to start to get your idea into something playable than it was just a few years ago now.
Absolutely. I'll show you that
I
near
know
the
you
end
got
of the.
that coming. I don't want to do
Yeah,
spoilers, but
no, no, no.
this because right now, if we were sat here 2 or 3 years ago, we go, oh, this is great, but I can't afford to build a game.
Yeah,
And actually, we can all have a go at building a game now. It's really empowering. It may not be the perfect game. We've talked about that as well. It may not be the finished, but we can take it from this to having a play.
indeed. And there's lots of different ways to do that. And I'll sort of outline, I think, some of the most accessible through to some of the slightly more complicated, but all of them have a point of entry. But I think what we're trying to do here with the game jams is just provide that a very initial kind of, okay, where could this go from I think this could be a game to, oh no, I really think this could be a game.
And it goes back to
And
what we've covered before. If you're building an app or a website, you got to, who is it for? Why are we building it? What do we want them to do? It's all the same questions, really, just with a different
yeah,
lens.
absolutely. And I think that's why I said have at the bottom the kind of the issue ultimately to then, what is it you're doing, whether it's on the website, how you're
What are you
navigating
doing it?
that,
Why are you
what are you
doing it?
doing?
How are you
Yeah.
doing it? You still got to have all those fundamentals.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I
And
think
at
I
the
think it's
end,
just so exciting.
oh, thanks, Lucy. And at the end, what we try and get people to think of is what is the overall experience, like we did with the Oracle project. We wanted people to understand what it was like to go through the experience of oracular consultation, something really, really hard to communicate in any other form than a sort of immersive environment. Because you can take people through it in the abstract, but that's really hard, especially when
Yeah.
it's people communing with a tree in ancient Greece in the middle of nowhere. That's a lot of steps for people to make imaginatively, because we're so decontextualized from that sort of that world and way of doing things, but actually this helped bring it back. So this is kind of just a sort of snapshot of how some of those game jams look when they're being run, and we've run a lot of them in the spaces we have access to here at the University of Bristol, but you can run them anywhere. I run them in small town halls with groups of young people, through to kind of classroom setups, through to other public spaces, including one in the middle of a protected site right on the edge of Bristol, a place called Ley Woods, which I'll show in a minute. But the point is the method is flexible enough to be accommodated in different spaces. But we have found that there's, as we say this in the toolkit, there's a few things you do need, which is kind of, it's like the whiteboards, it's the spaces to ideate on, but it's also things to then make with. So we've sometimes used Lego, we've used other kind of paper prototyping and physical prototyping tools to support the concept development stage. We also tend to incorporate play as part of it as well, something that's often missing from kind of game studies work, etc. But play is at the core of it. So we tend to have games playable while we're doing the jam so that you can kind of get inspiration and be inspired and experience kind of the possibility space. Because again, if you're concept developing and prototyping, it's the reality of what you can make is quite basic, but you want to kind of also see what is possible so that you can kind of
That's a really good point. So we talk
calibrate.
about a website. We all know about a website that we would like to have ours look like. When it comes to gaming, I think we've all admitted we're a bit maybe not that current with what games can do. So I think having that concept of what's possible would be very useful for. I think myself, I'm speaking for people who said what their gaming experience in the chat. It's just from Sonic to now is quite a leap.
Indeed, but actually, it's funny. You can build a platformer quite quickly these days. But you could also, think about, okay, well, could this concept work as a full, role-playing game experience, or is it ultimately just the simple click and tick text adventure game? I think it's about calibrating those expectations, and we try and help people do that as well as get inspiration in the moment. And again, this is what like actually designing those game mechanics looks like in practice. It's about drawing lots of boxes and directions and arrows and movements. But this ultimately became a game about accessibility that was incredibly fun to play, as you can see from the people on the left there that were playing the prototype that came out of the whiteboard there. Um, so sometimes our game jams stay at the concept stage where we just come up with the idea because building it would be impossible in that short time. But sometimes we run game jams that then go on to build digital prototypes in a day or two as part of it. So again, the method it's not just about making games, it's about what is it you need to make in the moment to investigate the problem. And that might just be stay at the concept level. It might be, no, I want a prototype. And to sort of show how this can then go even outside of sort of university and screen-based context, again, games they don't just have to be screen-based. One game jam we ran, which I really enjoyed, was in partnership with Natural England, and we went to Ley Woods, a protected site. This game jam was all about, well, how can we rethink public engagement with protected sites, which are really complicated sites because you have to have a lot of protections in place for them, especially if they're like really close to cities. They have particular context that you have to manage as kind of custodians. You have to manage, but also they're open spaces for the public, so you have to keep the public able to be using these spaces. So they're a complex thing, and the public engagement strategies to date are well, quite sort of. They came about decades ago, and they haven't really changed in that time. So we were thinking, well, what other kind of public engagement strategies could you develop, could you design? And we used the game jam as a concept, but part of that game jam involved spending 4 hours walking through Ley Woods, talking to the experts that manage those sites and how they do that. So that involves sort of exploring the particularly unique elements of Ley Woods, the wildlife, the existing interpretation. You can see those boards there, decades old, cut into logs, and that's the kind of public engagement as it stands today. So we were trying to sort of stretch our minds beyond that, and one of the best ways of doing that was immersing ourselves in this case, literally the topic. Then we came back, we did a lot of paper prototyping in this case, thinking about kind of different apps, sort of gamified augmented reality experiences that you could have across different sites, and that really stress tested what those sort of public engagement strategies could look like if they had a bit more of a digital flavor. But again, there are challenges still to be resolved there in terms of if there's signal at these spaces. So yeah, but the game jam concept was again not about let's go and build a digital app. It was more what other things could we do? And again, games were a way of thinking through that problem. That's the game jam element. I'll sort of park that for a moment and just move on to sort of co-design to show what it looks like to then go on and make a game as an output, as a part of a project. So it's not just about the ideation stage, but what follows. And for this, I'm going to talk about a project called Culture Quest. And this was another one of those collaborative projects that I really wanted to do more of after working on the Oracle project. And this time it was a three-way collaboration between the University of Bristol, where I led the research team, Meaning Machine, which is a Bristol-based games and deep tech company, and Bristol Museums, who are our kind of cultural heritage partner. This was funded by Digital Catapult and Innovate UK. Last year, we did a kind of 3-month game design sprint, so slightly mad in terms of the shortness of the time, but we were able to make a game and put it into the museum in that time. So it shows the sort of what is possible now, as you were saying, Lucy. And the context of this game was a quest-based system. So quest-based systems are quite typical for museum context. You often have kind of quest-based experiences. You have to go off and find this. What we were interested in testing was whether an AI-based quest-based system could work, where you get to converse with characters in a museum who set you off on quest to go and investigate the world, and you can go and talk to them about what you're seeing and sort of unearth sort of knowledge and information that way. And we worked with the museum as a sort of case study, and they were deeply involved in co-creating this experience throughout. I won't go too deeply into the sort of particulars of this project, but there were 3 challenges we were aiming to investigate, which is in the UK at least, galleries, libraries, archives, and museums have been kind of pushed towards using Gen AI in some capacity, but they were sort of calling out for a bit more help and support in making sense of where and how they could use it meaningfully, if they should use it, indeed. So we were interested in kind of exploring that with them and helping make sense of that problem. We also know that as vital spaces of public learning, they have unfortunately seen year-on-year decreases in visitor numbers. Some are bucking this trend now, but the overall numbers are still below COVID, pre-COVID. So we were interested in kind of immersive tech, in this case, kind of a more gamified experience, enhance visitor engagement, and indeed kind of help with repeat visitor engagement, because we know that can happen in the research. And then we're interested in sort of deploying more accessible technology, because while VR and the project we did with the Oracle, we put that into Bristol Museum as a pop-up, it's really hard to maintain and kind of make accessible a full VR headset experience, as people may know if they've seen them in museums themselves. But what we were trying to build was a mobile-based experience, so much more accessible. Everyone has a phone pretty much, or could be loaned a phone. So we were sort of thinking, okay, what's the sort of easiest point of entry here?
I was
Could
going
we
to ask
scale it?
about that because technology, you want to make it really inclusive. Did you
Yeah.
also have some phones that people were lent when they came if they didn't
Yes,
have yeah? Because
absolutely. So
there's the project at the Beckford Tower had the same thing, and we don't want it to exclude anybody. And I like the fact this is really interactive, because you're right. There's a real issue in heritage of they don't want everyone looking at their screens. They want them looking at the artifacts, but actually the
absolutely.
combination to enhance the relationship with the artifacts.
Indeed, and I mean, I'll show with the sort of findings that we had from running a player study here. It's really hard to get that integration right. Like, how much do
Mm.
people want to be on their screens? Do they want to be on screens at all? Yeah,
We've
I don't
left
think
the
we.
house to not be on our
I know
screens.
exactly, exactly.
That's why you're mentioning like the woods. I love that the augmented reality, like the Pokemon Go kind of vibe of you're exploring and getting an enhanced experience, but you're still having the experience. You're not. Yeah, VR headset still feels too like I've
It
got
takes you
tech
away.
stuck to my head, and I don't want Meta glasses yet. I don't think I ever want those, but that's probably where this might be going.
And this has been the benefit of working across kind of VR home-based games, screen, some normal traditional PC games, is that they all have their place. And I think
Yeah.
VR does have its place very much. And I know the previous webinar on this sort of showed where that could be as well. But in this case, yeah, we were interested in, can you enhance existing galleries that have already got kind of interpretation and other things there with this kind of experience? So it was kind of an add-on to existing spaces rather than its own kind of specialist pop-up. So what did we build in 3 months? Well, we built a game where you converse with the Egyptian gods, who send you off on a quest around the Egyptian Gallery and Bristol Museum and Art Gallery. And it uses Meaning Machine's game-conscious AI platform, which I'll show in a moment, and their quest maker system to send you off on a series of quests with a sort of branching narrative. And your aim, you would kind of adopt the role of an ancient Egyptian woman whose coffin is on display, but her remains are not. Um, that kind of trying to make sense of the beliefs that she may well have held. from what we know of her. And it's about trying to navigate the afterlife. Her coffin is inscribed with all this kind of help and support for trying to reach the afterlife. So you're trying to kind of echo that in the journey that you undertake. All the gods have distinct personalities. That's what sort of we really wanted to lean into. They have a particular kind of role in the story, and they come across in certain ways, and you've got to negotiate with them to reach the afterlife.
And it feels like we know those gods quite well. I mean, I've maybe watched too many films, but I feel that's already, I've heard of all of it. It feels quite accessible already. It's a good one to choose.
And this was the, I guess, where the sort of the gamify bit came in. We ran a game jam ourselves in-house to sort of work out what we were going to do here. And it was really interesting because originally we aligned on, or maybe you're an archaeologist's assistant and the archaeologist is somehow trapped in the past and you're trying to save them. And we went through a whole series of different stories we could tell and ultimately realized, well, these are all, there's lots of steps you have to do to even get to where we need you to be in kind of exploring the space. We were adding too much to it. But the gallery is already aligned around themes of afterlife, death, afterlife, rebirth, life, and there's lots about the gods in that space because that's what we've got a lot of funerary relics and artifacts, and so we really were leaning into what the narrative already was, but also we were learning from how people were exploring that gallery space already, and they largely kind of meandered. They didn't quite get that there is actually a structure to that space, so we were trying to kind of lean into what the designers of the space had wanted by adding something that could kind of reinforce that narrative, but through a different, coming at it in a different way.
I really like that thought process as well. The fact that you you did what we all do. You overcomplicated it at the beginning, and then you wound it
Yes,
back. We it's just human nature, isn't
absolutely.
it?
Yeah, and keep it simple, like in the
There's a
afterlife.
woman there. Let's be on her journey. And again, that's
Yeah,
about like, we've all got our projects, we've all got the person we want to reach. Let's be them.
yeah, that's a really good way of thinking about it, and it worked sort of especially in this case because in the ancient Egyptian afterlife context, you were alone. You would meet the gods, but you wouldn't meet other people in the afterlife as you went through that journey. So there's a real logic to you are there talking to the gods. That is literally echoing the kind of belief system. So we were trying to sort of think about, yeah, what is the simplest but most powerful version of that story we could tell. Um, and this is Meaning Machine's conversation creator system. So we've done quite a lot of projects with this company, and that's opened a really productive relationship where we were able to kind of use some of the tooling, which is what they call this, sort of out of the box for the purposes of this project. And what did that involve? Well, it meant that we were basically writing a giant database for what this game could be. We defined the characters, the world, the setting, who you are as the player character, what the conversation kind of terms are. And for anyone who's seen sort of some of the AI webinars and things, but basically what you're doing here is creating a giant prompt, an enormous prompt that is sort of then can be pointed at any large language model or even small language models to define the context for the conversation, and that's what keeps it on the rails, along with the knowledge database that we built, and that was all based upon kind of verifiable museum data that the museum was cataloging and had done a really good job to kind of bring up to date, and sort of sources that we discussed with Egyptologist consultants. We had a kind of a good data back end. We had this whole story front end, and then we co-wrote that story with the museum. What does that look like? Well, I'm just showing you a bit of that game loop I mentioned earlier for the game jams. These are the characters you meet. So the god Osiris, who's your guide. You also meet Anubis, the god of the dead, and sort of ramification. You meet Ma'at, who's the goddess of justice and balance, and then you also meet Ra as well. And you go through it in a kind of branching way. You start with Osiris, you go off to the other characters, who send you to Ra. You have to come back at the end, and you sort of follow that loop through. And all the gods want something of you. They all want you to go and find something. Um, they all have a particular reason for that. So I've got Ra as an example here. We had him be terrified of crocodiles because he has to fight them every night as he goes through his barge in the underworld before coming back and becoming the sun the next day. So that's our invention, that's our addition, but it also is a kind of logic based upon his story. And then you have to go and find this baby mummified crocodile in the gallery, fascinating kind of object and an offering. Um, and then you find out sort of who the crocodile god is, sort of idea of offerings and why they mattered. And then you get to type in kind of your answer, and that unlocks the next stage of the quest. So it's all conversation based, but what you're seeing here is very, very traditional game design principles at work. And we worked with Meaning Machine, who basically told us in this case the game had to be fun. It really did have to be fun because it's something about engagement, about moving around the gallery. But what they gave us was a kind of almost an abstract. This is a game loop, what a loop could look like, and then it was up to us actually as a research team to kind of fill that out with the characters and the nuance. But ultimately, you could take this principle and apply it to a different context with different characters. We then ran a whole research player study on that. So we took 40 members of the public, gave them the game, and let them play it. And we split those in half. We had made some people play it as a group, some people as individuals who were really interested in how this would work, like the dynamics of it. Um, and that was
I love the
fascinating.
comments. I got into an argument with
Yeah,
Anubis.
that is that is my all-time favorite comment, and will definitely
Feisty
be going.
gods. I mean, they were feisty gods. That was the whole point, wasn't it? Wow.
Absolutely. I
Sassy.
think this has been the learning from within the lab as well, that we need to do the whole piece. So this project to us encapsulates running from a game jam to co-developing a game with an industry partner and a cultural heritage partner to solve a challenge and to engage people more with that space. And then we did a scientific study, a player study at the end, to sort of better inform how we could design the game again. So it's that sort of full holistic picture. Not saying everyone has to do that on every project, but that's what we found has really been working for us.
We can
Um,
find museums overwhelming, as you said, people kind of walking in and going, "Ugh, this gives you a little narrative." It's a bit like when you
yes,
have audio guides, when that sort of
yeah.
thing, someone talking you through the journey so that you don't miss the baby crocodile, which is a brilliant exhibit, but you might not realize what it was because there's too much information. I think it's it when you walk into a museum room traditionally, there's all the little plaques and it's too much.
Indeed, and even the traditional audio guide, which is one of the things we were sort of exploring a different form of here, is they're linear. You have to
Yeah.
just listen at the pace that that's delivered at, whether or not you're interested. And what we were trying to embed here is that, what does work from the kind of AI chatbot is that sort of conversational based experience where you can query, you can come back, you can ask at your pace, you can inquire. But we were also giving the game quest as a framework so that it's not just going to a museum and ask a chatbot something, which I have seen been done in a couple of contexts, and it works up to a point, but we were sort of trying to take it beyond that and use very traditional game
They've all
design.
had an emotional response to this. They've not
Yes,
only had a
that's
richer
the difference.
experience, they've also had an emotional response of like they've had a chat with the gods. They're going to leave bubbling and want to go
Uh,
back because they're getting back people back in the room, which is the ultimate goal here, isn't it? It's more people engaging at the museum.
Indeed, and there's that quote there in the middle under engagement. So had been to the gallery before, but never really engaged with it. This prompted me to engage more. So this is
Perfect.
what we have been observing. This is what we really wanted to achieve. Again, absolutely wasn't a flawless experience. We did build it in 3 months. It's not available to play all the time at the moment. It was very much a prototype, a sort of minimal viable prototype that we wanted to build. Um, so we learned from this, for instance, that we didn't make the objectives clear enough and that the user experience definitely needs some refinement. So that was really helpful. And that point about integration we mentioned earlier is some
Mm.
people said, oh, all the answers were on touch screens or on the phone, and that distracted them from the exhibits. This wasn't so
It,
much a
it's
problem with the group.
it's really hard though because we all have such individual experiences in every space.
Absolutely. I mean, this wasn't sort of telling us don't do it, but we'd already learned that for those in a group, that worked like an escape room. So people
Yeah.
could be sort of sent off on different bits of the quest and find out different bits of information. And then a lot of people weren't on their phones. That was great. Others wanted it to be an audio experience only, so they could sort of put the phone in the pocket and that could be an option in the future.
And if you ask people what they want, they probably don't know because we're not used to having this experience. So them doing it gives you, they had to do it to give you meaningful feedback because they might have said, well, what they'll say and what they'll do. We all know that users don't know what they do and don't want to do
Yes,
generally.
it's indeed. So the way we run player studies is we are always in the room with people. We have them think aloud. We survey them before and after, and we interview them after. And all of these quotes here are coming from the interviews we did right after players had played the game. But we also have all the questions they asked, and that's what gives us that kind of really rich picture. So we took all of that. We've been sort of rebuilding the game in the background. We're looking for further partners so that we can kind of put this into different cultural heritage contexts and sort of test those learnings and see if they work. But the other thing we did this year, following on from the project, was we went back to Bristol Museum, played it again with our revised game. Everyone completed it, so that showed that we did improve some of the objective side of things. We also gave the tooling that we used to build the game to a whole bunch of cultural heritage partners who'd come for the day from other museums to build their own games. Because the idea here was that we open up the toolkit so that other people could rapidly prototype their own experience. And what you can do in the tooling that Meaning Machine have built is fill out that whole story world, and then instantly have a conversation with the characters you've created. So it really is about that kind of rapid prototyping, and you can go quite quickly. Okay, is this something that would work in museum I run, or the one that I would like to see this in? So we really were then kind of trying to upskill or empower other cultural heritage professionals to test if this was something they would do, how they would explore it, and sort of really investigate some of the ethical questions that are indeed raised by this. Where does the data sit? Is this sustainable? And from our view, we didn't solve those problems on the project, but we did inquire and explore all of them. Like there is a way to make this sustainable, which would be to bring it on device on more high-powered mobiles that you'd probably then need to loan out. But then I proposed that to a museum and tech conference, and museum curators got scared because that in itself is a whole challenge, managing devices in that kind of context. So I think we're not there yet for having this as a sort of fully work through solution, but the whole point was to work it through with the people who would indeed be using it if it was to work at scale. So we've learned a lot from running this project. It was really interesting to see curators and policymakers write their own stories, and they really did have a lot of fun doing this. It's about empowering really good human-led stories, because the AI system is literally just an engine. It's just enabling that story to work in the moment for players to then ask their own questions, to be directed by the characters depending on what you're asking. It's that sort of that free form interaction that the AI gives. It doesn't give any of the narrative. That is only drawing on what you put in. So it really is all about more narrative design, more humans providing more creative content, and the AI just sits as the engine, which is the opposite of kind of how a lot of tech companies try and frame these tools. Yeah, that's where we're at with that project. And I want to sort of conclude with a final example that the more I've been experimenting in this space with partners, the more I've realized the limits of my own knowledge and kind of experiences. So we've been doing a whole training program recently around making use of 3D modeling tools like Blender, working with Unity, the game engine, and Unreal, to sort of see what kind of things we could do in-house. So we're not always reliant on working with game developers, because that's one route. But again, it is a route that's normally only possible if you've got funding for a project and bring them on board. That can range from individual freelance developers that we've worked with, all the way through to companies like Mini Machine. We've run some projects where we've built a game around postnatal depression to explore what that means for new fathers, and we work with a digital artist to build that game. With Culture Quest, we work with a whole company. For other games, we're looking, can we build it all in-house, or can we prototype in-house and then take it out to a partner? So there's lots of different ways you can sort of enter this way of working of these different pipelines. But one way that we've been doing recently is this kind of training. So nodding to my classics background, that's me on the left there, modeling a temple and then putting it into Unity in a skybox, working out the scripts needed to be able to walk around that space, what that looks like. But that was all built in like a matter of a day and a bit. So it struck me how quickly the inquiry machine loop was working when I wasn't just playing something that someone else had made, but I was making it right from the scratch myself. So these tools are learnable, even when you don't have a tech background, and learning what they can do also helps to calibrate what you would like to do with them. So I'm basically just advocating for other people to explore them in their own time and ways, alongside working with partners. I think doing both is really valuable. And a final point, there are definitely other ways you can do some of this work without needing that kind of technical expertise yourself, or indeed with partners, and you can do that by modding existing games. You can modify already built game worlds to tell different stories, and this is actually incredibly useful as a way in, because you don't have to build the entire system. You don't have to work out what the characters are going to look like, or what the world looks like, or what the mechanics will be. You can simply pick all of that up and create a new scene or a new scenario or a new story. And you can do that in a whole range of games, from Assassin's Creed has story creator modes, through to strategy games that allow you to build new scenes, through to something like Grand Theft Auto, where you can play around and mod that world. So there are lots of ways you can use existing tools, is what I'm trying to say, without having to build everything from scratch. A game as a project doesn't mean I need to perfect game programming and coding myself and build it from scratch. You can do that. Solo developers do that, but you can also use these other tools. Same with machinima, that's like filming within game worlds to tell new stories. And I mentioned Grand Theft Auto. One of the best examples I've ever seen of this is Grand Theft Hamlet, about trying to stage Hamlet in Grand Theft Auto during COVID. It's an award-winning kind of documentary. It's absolutely brilliant, but it shows again the power of how a game can form the backdrop for a whole new kind of experience and reach new audiences. And then analog games, often the best way in because you really have to think about the mechanics. You have to think about what you're doing, how those things interact. And often that's a much easier point to begin with because you don't have to play with all the software and the systems, but you do get to still play with those kind of core mechanics and principles. And there are brilliant game centers and labs out there that mostly focus on analog games, such as the Manchester Game Centre. They do amazing work with analog games. And I've got a lot of colleagues in history that are doing this as well in the classroom, in their own research, where they're coming up with kind of card games or board games that help explore history in different ways. So there's lots of points of entry. And hopefully today I've just shown kind of a snapshot of different ones, and indeed sort of opened up the conversation around what the next step might be for you individually or for your projects. And I'm very happy to kind of consult, potentially facilitate game jams for people who've heard what we've been doing today.
And we will share some links to videos and examples and lots of bits in the description of the YouTube video, which I'll try and put up, if not later today, then tomorrow. But I think this is such a powerful way of having different conversations, different experiences.
Absolutely. It's kind of blown my mind working with so many different projects in a game jam context as to, you know, it's worked every time, and I'm still myself trying to work out why and write that up as a separate piece of research. But it really does allow people to come together around something and to sort of build together from the ground up.
I like the whiteboarding and the post-it notes. It's a very experiential session, as you say. But also, and it's in iterations and it's a group discussion. It's very inclusive.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we've always felt. And we always do kind of icebreakers at the start. And I love the best game jams to me are the ones where you got people from every single discipline you can imagine coming together around a theme, because I think games can be a unifying tool in that way. There are obviously a lot of problems and politics around games at the moment, and there have been for a while. But I think this is a space we can reclaim and use games for their power.
For good and to help.
Yeah.
Which is all these. Thank you ever so much for your time. I'm going to stop the recording. Does anybody have any questions before we